that you don't love me back, back. I can't stand this feeling inside my mind. Baby, please just tell me if I'm fine. Cause I don't know why you're stuck in my heart. Could be my best bud, not best bud. I won't pull up your fake bud. And I feel good when you walk around, baby, just do it. Could be my best bud, not best bud. I won't pull up your fake bud. And I feel good when you walk around, baby, just do it.
Could be my best bud, my best bud. I will pull up your fake booty. And I'm feeling good, now I'm feeling good when you walk around, baby, just do that.
Try to hold the breath you've taken at last. It's getting cold, getting cold, getting cold, getting cold. A seething in my chest, you give me no rest. It's getting old, getting old, getting old, getting old. Used to fly higher and higher. These days I'm just going down, down. Whatever you do, every time I fall before you, if only I knew. Anywhere I fall before you, whatever you do. Every single time I fall for you, whatever you do. Every time I fall for you, Try to hold my breath. You've taken that land. Getting cold, getting cold, getting cold. Always play pretend with a helping hand. Pick me up, pick me up, pick me up, pick me up. This is not the end, and I drop again. But I'm not giving up, giving up, giving up, no. Used to fly higher and higher. These days I'm just going down, down.
Good afternoon. I'm David Wilson. I'm chair of the board of the Provincetown Theater. We'd like to welcome you to our community conversation, which is going to take a lot of different turns here, but what we thought we'd start with is our connection to the Laramie project. Provincetown Theater live streamed the Laramie project this weekend, and it chronicled the life of Matthew Shepard and obviously his demise on the hills in Laramie. I'd like to just give you a brief connection that I have to Laramie, Wyoming, and then I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. About 8 years ago, our daughter, Jackie Compton Grimes, met a wonderful guy from Laramie, Wyoming. She fell in love, and shortly after meeting him, they began to date, and she asked me if I would marry him, and Rob would give them away. That's my husband. So we flew to Laramie, and on a hillside, not far from the hillside where Matthew Shepard was murdered, we married Jackie and her husband, James. James was actually in middle school when Matthew Shepard was murdered, so I had a chance to talk to him about what happened to the town and its people. Now, fast forward to today. We're very proud of our Jackie. She's running for the Wyoming State Senate. And the seat she's running for is the seat that's occupied by Kathy Conley. Kathy Conley was the first out gay person at the University of University of Wyoming. And she was there when Matthew Shepard was murdered, and she helped bring the community together at the University of Wyoming. So we have gone full circle. Jackie was married in Laramie. Her two dads were part of her marriage. She's now running for Kathy Conley's seat. And hopefully in November, she will proudly take Kathy's seat, and we will have gone full circle with our connection with the Laramie project. And now I'd like to just introduce our three panelists. On our screen, you'll see Reverend Kate Wilkinson, who is the pastor at the Unitarian Church. Below Kate on the screen is Julie Grandi. She's going to tell her story about her connection with not just the box lunch, but a project she's been running that we're very proud of and would love to talk about more today. And Steve Katsarinas, who is the chair of the Board of Health in Provincetown. Someone's clock is timing, but it's a good thing. I'd like to ask the first question of Kate. I gave a little personal story about how I'm connected to the Laramie community. And James told me a lot about what happened to the community after the death of Matthew Shepard. We're experiencing some very same and similar feelings here in Provincetown after the introduction of a deadly virus and the shutting down of our town, our homes, and the connection with all of our community and the people in it. Kate, I'd like you to respond to how you think we are getting through this today and what the future looks like as you see it from your perspective.
Well, thank you. It's true that we are in a time of loss and grief and unknowns. There's a lot of stress and anxiety happening. Part of the difficulty is we don't know how long this is going to last either. So that's raising our anxiety level up to a new level. We're not sure what the season in Provincetown is going to look like this year. And I think the same things that got people through all kinds of challenges in the past are what is going to get us through here, which is connection to each other and staying connected in this new physical distancing world. poses a challenge, but we're finding lots of creative ways to do that. For instance, this online panel and people tuning in online. I know that at the meeting house, we've moved all of our worship services online to an online format, and we have Zoom coffee hour, and we have people who are calling everyone in our directory, making sure that they don't feel isolated and alone. And I think that feeling of togetherness and that community response is really what's going to pull us through this too.
Thanks, Kate. Steve, can I ask you the same question? Where are we, from your perspective, both as a town and our people, as we move through this COVID-19 crisis?
Thanks, and thanks for doing this. I mean, my perspective is, as the chair of the Board of Health, that we are kind of more together in some ways than when we're free to move around. So we're sort of, I think, together, united, alone. And what I mean by that is, you know, for this to work, we have enforcement mechanisms, but for this to work in a country like ours, people have to be willing to put something ahead of themselves, to put the notion that their neighbor, you know, will survive or not be based on how you behave. And people have chosen to put other people ahead of themselves and do that in a way that I think is very selfless and it's very complete. I mean, we don't see people who are taking this in a cavalier manner or, you know, making this about themselves. People are really making this about the community and the effort to work together. And they're doing it voluntarily. And I have to say that it's pretty amazing. And it says a lot about, you know, about us as a people. I think you get to find out who people really are in times of great stress and great crisis. And when I look out there, I see that. And when I do encounter somebody who seems to be struggling, and maybe they're angry or maybe they're fearful to a level that's more than there's a fear we're all experiencing. But when you see that somebody's really struggling, you know, it's great when people reach out and try to encourage that person and to approach them from a place of compassion, to understand that if they're behaving in a way that is problematic, it's probably because of something going on within them that's, you know, that's a great challenge and a great problem. And so by helping each other out, we can, I think, help to overcome that.
Thanks, Steve. Julie, you've got a different perspective, and I thought it would be nice to hear you share how this challenge has affected you and what you've decided to do about it.
Well, I think then they were talking about our Truro Community Kitchen, correct?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so 2.5 weeks ago, there were a few people in the town of Truro. As you know, our facility is open in the town of Truro, and we wanted to do something that would help folks in need. And as the reality set in of the whole, you know, essential workers only, it meant that a lot of people were staying home and overtime was not available, and people's livelihood was completely changed. Because our facility is in Truro, we wanted to focus on the folks in Truro. There seemed to be a lot of help in the town of Provincetown, and you hear less about that in Truro. So we connected with the police department, who then reached out to the COA, the school system, Outer Cape Health, and the churches in Truro, and asked if there were families in need that could benefit from meals. And so we've had 2 weeks now of serving meals on Sunday. Our first week had 80 participants. And then last week, just Sunday, we had 120 participants. It's all anonymous. So we actually, people come and pick up, and they're identified by a number. They have a number. And then the delivery is just an address and a phone number. So we don't really know who we're delivering to, and it doesn't matter. It's all about helping our neighbors and just being kind. And there are, you know, some folks that are elderly, and they have been self-quarantining for 4 weeks now. It's a long time. You know, it's a long time to be by themselves. And sort of wave through the window and smile. And it's about being kind to your neighbor. It's about, having just an awareness of who's around you and what their needs are. And sometimes it's just a personal touch of kindness. So a warm meal and a big smile is what we try to provide on Sundays for Truro.
Julie, do you mind sharing how this is being funded and how our audience might be able to help?
Yes, actually, that'd be great. The Truro Community Kitchen is a nonprofit that was started actually 2 weeks ago today. You can go online to TruroCommunityKitchen.com. You can Facebook. We are welcome to donate, and any amount is certainly helpful. To date, we've had a tremendous amount of donations, but also just goodwill donations from restaurateurs. They've been very kind. Emily Beebe, the health inspector in Truro, is definitely on board with this, and she's someone we wanted her blessing right from the beginning. The Truro Police Department, they actually coordinate all the deliveries. So it's just rolled out very nicely. If someone wanted to come into Box Lunch, certainly they could make a donation there also.
Thanks, Julie. And I guess, Kate, we're on this sort of path here to talking about humanitarianism. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what your community, the faith community, and maybe specifically what your church is doing as an outreach.
Sure, thank you. Well, all of the churches in Provincetown are doing services whatever way they can. So most of us have moved online and are trying to have that Sunday touchstone for people to sort of ground them for the rest of the week. And each church has also developed their own core of volunteers who are doing calls, grocery runs, pet walking. It's really amazing how people have stepped up during this time to make sure that everyone has everything they need. We have a lot of overlap in our congregation with people who are on the COVID-19 task force too, that are trying to make sure everyone has the access to mental health resources as well, and medications and groceries, and the buddy line, which is great. There's people who are part of the mask making group who are making homemade masks for folks. So it's a lot of grassroots efforts that are continuing to keep us connected. I've started doing something called Minister's Minute. So every day I post a really short message on Facebook and YouTube, just with some coping mechanisms for getting through these days. And sometimes they're silly and sometimes they're serious. Sometimes they offer a spiritual practice, like a really short meditation that might help people. We're really seeing that this whole experience is a roller coaster of emotions, and some days you'll be handling it just fine, and some days you'll be really struggling. So making sure that people have touchstones throughout their day and week to connect with each other is great. In Provincetown, it's wonderful. All of the town agencies are on a conference call every Tuesday morning where we can connect, let people know what we have to offer. There's discretionary funds at most of the churches that can help out a little, because we know that people are going to be struggling to pay their bills soon. So we're all pooling our resources there and trying to get the money where it's needed as well.
Thanks, Kate. I think Kate threw you a softball, Steve, when she mentioned the town agencies. Could you pick it up and talk about what the Board of Health is doing, and more broadly, what the town is doing to cope with this crisis?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot that I could say, but I'll try to be focused on stuff that maybe people haven't heard before or are not aware of. So maybe one of the things I can do is talk a little bit about how people interface with the Board of Health who might have symptoms, so that you can get a sense of what the services that we're directly providing look like. So a couple of weeks ago, if a person were to have arrived from somewhere else, we would have reached out at some point and invited them to share with us whether they had symptoms. And if they did have symptoms, we would have a public health nurse screen, and ultimately a physician would order a test. And they would go then and they would be tested. When the results came back, if they were negative, they would be told that. If they came back positive, then we would offer them a combination of services. First, we would make sure that the public health nurse stayed engaged, following symptoms and tracking them to make sure that they were improving. And if they weren't, then getting them additional treatment, potentially even a visit to the hospital. And then from the Board of Health side, so that would be a state Department of Public Health, public nurse, funded and organized by the county, by Barnstable County. From the local level, what our volunteers, board members would do, and Morgan Clark, the director of the Department of Health, we would provide them with wraparound services. So some of the stuff that Reverend Kate just mentioned, but food, making sure their housing was safe and appropriate, making sure that they had people that were able to provide them with the things they need. Often there was a roommate or a housemaid or a spouse that could do some direct care. We would also, of course, talk to that person about symptoms. And depending on the situation, we might determine that they were presumptively positive. And so without sending them to go get a test, if they had symptoms and were living with someone who had had a test, we would treat them as positive and they would get the same level of care then. And so then we would just make sure that there were the supports in place so that food and shelter were taken care of. If there were mental health issues, we would make sure there was a referral there to treatment. So just making sure that people were able to maintain the maximum amount of maintenance in the home around a quarantine type order. And then at some point after their after their symptoms would abate, they would be cleared, and then they would be able to move around the community. And at that point, a number of people volunteered and became part of a core of people who, because we presume they now have antibodies or developing antibodies, they can take more risks and be more helpful to people who are at risk. And so they've now been helping to take care of people who are also testing positive or having symptoms. And I will just say, we don't go into the direct numbers at the Board of Health because we provide direct care and we want people to be confident that their information is confidential and won't be revealed. But if you look at the Provincetown website, you can see information about the numbers. And we really have been very fortunate to have seen the numbers drop precipitously based on that care. So we have a large number of recovered. We have a very small number of people that we believe are actively dealing with the virus, and they're getting the kind of care I just described. So it's really, I feel very proud of the work that we've done here to try to make this bearable for people to have the best possible outcome. I will mention that we did lose one of our town members to this virus, and it was, of course, very sad for all of us and all the people who had worked directly with him. And the whole community, really lost a valuable member, and we've left a little hole in our heart. But I feel like that this has worked as well as it possibly could, considering that 2 months ago, if you had told me that we would be doing this right now, I would have thought that you were insane. So we've gone from a theoretical response to an actual response, and it's been pretty incredible. And then, again, I want to give credit to the whole town because flattening the curve didn't happen because the Board of Health was caring for people. Flattening the curve happened because everybody stayed inside as much as possible. And when they went out, they took precautions and stayed far away from people. So that's really the people who deserve the credit.
Thanks, Steve. This is kind of a two-part question, and I'm going to open it up for all three of our panelists. Can you think about what you consider your greatest challenges? And then on the other side of it, certainly the positive side of it, what are the opportunities that we might see come out of this? Some sort of what are the challenges on one side, and what are the opportunities that we might see that will benefit us as a town and as a people going forward? Anyone can jump in.
I can start.
Great, thanks, Kate.
Well, I think one challenge is that we're all going through this process sort of in parallel to each other, but our experience of it is going to be really different. each of us, even within the same household, right?
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
it's really hard to map your experience onto the experience of others around you. And some people will be dealing with different anxiety and fear. Some people will have the health ramifications. Some people will be introverts and some extroverts. You know, some are caring for children and some are living alone. So how we stay um, sort of in touch with each other's emotions and have some generosity of spirit around that, and not get into too much friction of thinking that people should be doing it the way you would do it. So that's a challenge. We also, um, within our congregation, we have a wide range of experiences. That's why I'm so glad that we were able to connect with the other town agencies for help. So, I have the homeless member who I was really worried about and suddenly didn't have any way of getting in touch with because they usually use the internet at the library and we only see them on Sundays. So I was able to get in touch with the Homeless Prevention Network and check in and make sure that that person was okay. I just reached out to Chris Hoddle at the COA to say, I've got parishioners that have dementia and confusion, and it's really hard to explain to them what's happening, especially when you can't do in-person visits. So there's all kinds of challenges that I never would have thought of before this. I'm also, filming my sermons in my basement. I had to physically create a space at home where I could give a message to people. And so I'm learning a new way of doing ministry, and there is a little bit of creativity involved there, which is a fun part if you're allowed to a fun part of trying to connect more personally and through story and not reading off of my page that I love to do so much. So I'm kind of growing through this experience, which was a surprise for me. But I think mostly it's how do we stay aware of what we're all going through when we're all going through the same thing together, but experiencing it really differently.
Kate, do you see a silver lining in all of this? Do you see something that we can all learn on the other side of this that will benefit us as a people?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to jump too quickly to silver linings, but I do see a lot of them. For one thing, the care that has come out of this. We had some people in our congregation who were very ill, and they just felt surrounded by love and attention, and that sense of connection has deepened for so many of us. Also, we are realizing we do not need to consume so much. We've gotten into this consumer society where we can get everything at the drop of a hat and we never have to wait or work for anything. And that's changing. So we're realizing what we can do without. There's ramifications for the environment that are positive that we couldn't have foreseen because we're not driving as much, creating as much pollution. So there are things, it's not like we would wish this to happen again. We want it to end as soon as possible, but there is some meaning that can be made. And I think that really kind of doing a scan of personal habits and energy we had placed into friendships that are now sustaining us, all of that is going to be really helpful as we go back to a new normal. I hope it doesn't go back to the same as it always was. I hope there are some changes that came out of this really self-reflective period.
Thanks, Kate. There's a question on my screen asking you to post the website that people can go to connect with you, services through you and the church.
Great. So you can go to uumh.org, which stands for UU Meeting House. And if you click on sermons, you'll get to all of our Sunday services, but also those little ministers' minutes that I mentioned. And we're also on Facebook. I think if you search Unitarian Universalist Meeting House, you might find us that way.
Thanks, Kate. And Julie, there's a same request for you. Can you repeat the website that you said in your opening remarks.
Yes, absolutely. It's the TruroCommunityKitchen.com. And yeah, we would be grateful for anything.
And now that I have you, Julie, can I ask you about challenges on one side and then what you see as opportunities on the other?
I think that the opportunity that this entire crisis has presented to me is it's made me slow down. And I don't know, in some ways, certainly it can be seen as a challenge, but to slow down and to appreciate the beautiful place that we live in, to appreciate the wonderful people that we're surrounded by, and then take the time for this project that I have jumped into to reach out to as many folks as I can. And really, I've reached out to people that I probably would never have connected to for a while anyway, and that's special. At the end of the day, to know that we've reached so many families and people are happy and they're it's not about them saying thank you. It's about being able to let them drive away with a peace of mind and one part of their week taken care of. That's an opportunity for us to just extend ourselves to as many other folks in our immediate area as we can. It's all of the wonderful people that are here, and something like this makes us slow down and have the time to do so. So that to me is a huge opportunity, just getting to better know our community and trying to put my energy into something that can help someone else. So
Thanks, Julie. Steve, I guess we're going to move to a similar humanitarian effort. And can you talk a little bit about our healthcare workers, our first responders, the people that we are all trying to support? We're applauding at some point during the day just the hard work that's going into saving lives. Can you speak to that for us?
Absolutely. And, you're exactly right. The healthcare workers are on the front line, whether they're the EMTs that transport people to hospitals, the physicians and nurses that are directly caring for patients. It's a very difficult time. And what I think sometimes gets forgotten is, what happens when Superman or Superwoman takes their cape off. So yes, folks show up, they work 12 to 18 hours a day, dealing with people. They have to wear PPE repeatedly, every engagement with a person that might be infected. So it's incredibly stressful and difficult. And then they go home and then they have to potentially care for other family members and hopefully they get cared for at the same time. But, a lot of us are able to go sit on our couch and watch Netflix and experience this in a very passive way. And so when we stop and think about the people that are not experiencing it in a passive way, the essential workers, and especially the physicians and healthcare workers that are directly on the line, I think we have to take our hats off to them and just recognize what an incredible thing that they're doing for society. And again, to tie back to what I was talking about earlier, which is they're doing that. And maybe you've seen the memes where, healthcare workers have signs and they say, we're taking care of patients and, we came to work so you can stay home. So please stay home. And I think that's a very effective message. And so, yeah, I appreciate you asking about that. I would like to get to the other question, if I could, also about dilemmas. To me, one of the things that I see in a lot of what we do, besides coordinating people who do direct care and provide services, is actually public messaging to tell people, what's going on, how are we doing, what's working, what's not working. And the thing that it puts into real stark relief for me is the people who have an extraordinary amount of fear and have sometimes some negative activities associated with that fear because it's just so overwhelming for them. And then at the other end of that continuum is what I see is hope. And it occurs to me when I think back to the time that I saw the Laramie Project at the Provincetown Theater, that was one of the messages. I think one of the lines is actually something like, "The rope is the hope, HOPE." And so, what I try to do when I engage with somebody who has a lot of fear and is expressing that fear in ways that, you know, causes them to be upset and causes others to be upset. First of all, you know, fear is a perfectly responsible and reasonable feeling for people to have. It's a good feeling. And so no one's wrong for being afraid. But sometimes with any emotion, you can take it to a place where it's not helpful for you or for the community. And so then we try to work on this notion of focusing on hope and understanding that, you know, although we've never been here before as a people and we don't really know how this is going to play out, we believe that we're going to come out of it stronger. And I think all of the points that Julie and Reverend Kate made, you know, reflect that this is opportunities to grow as a person and as a community, to care for each other and to change the way that we value things and to re-examine ourselves. And how, I mean, in my life, I've never really had this opportunity to sit down and be forced to contemplate the choices I've made that have gotten me here and the choices I can make in the future. And I think it's very powerful if you let it be in your life. And to be fearful is to be human. But if you can balance that with hope, you can get to a place where you can be of service to your fellow human. So those are some of the things I think about.
Thanks, Steve. And I just want to say to our viewers, especially our YouTube viewers, there is an opportunity to ask questions. We're at about the 30-minute mark. We were planning to go about 45 minutes. So if you have questions, please send them in. This is for all of our panelists. And it's kind of towards the direction towards what are we going to do in the future? And the question is, what are we missing? What should we be doing to help our community, not necessarily just today, which we've talked about, but beyond today? What kinds of services have we figured out we're going to need in the future? How can we be responsive to what's coming, but look at sort of the end of the road here and make sure that we're capturing everything that our community will need? So throw out some suggestions as kinds of things we should be thinking about when we finally get through to the end of this crisis. Kate, Julie,
Okay,
Steve?
I'll jump. It certainly makes me think about the importance of access to healthcare for all. That feels newly so important, although it was always. Also appreciating the people who serve our community. I mean, I'm thinking about the people who work at Stop and Shop and how appreciative we are right now for that service, and how, and I hope that when we move forward, we continue to be that appreciative of everyone who is putting food on our table, you know. So being a little bit more aware of all of the people who are involved in that process of bringing us what we need on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully moving forward, we can keep that paramount. And then I think the different communication methods that we have created through this, the community groups and subgroups and ways of connecting, making sure that we're in touch with our elders and shut-ins, I hope that continues. So keeping in place some of these connections between agencies and just community members. In a way, this has been a great equalizer because we're all in this together. So I think keeping that in mind as we move forward and think about, you know, when we're planning for anything in town, who should we involve and who's not at the table, and how do we spread the word, because we've gotten really creative about that in these days. So we should, you know, keep that up as much as we can.
Thanks,
Can I
Kate.
respond to something
Steve,
that?
there's a question for you, Steve, which I want to ask you, and then you can continue. The question is coming from one of our viewers. What's the plan for opening businesses in town?
So that's actually something that that the town manager, Robin Craver, has set as a priority, and she's gathering a group of stakeholders that will help her. I believe that health will be a significant part of that, because all of this, if you really boil it down, all of our efforts here are obviously to save lives, but the means by which we do that is to keep our public health system functioning, right? I mean, when we look at the failure that occurred in Italy, it was not just that people were dying, but it's that people who should not have died, people who could have been saved, were not saved. And we have avoided that in Massachusetts and in most of the United States. But that will be one of the things that I think will be the real focus of what it is that we're going to do to open up. Obviously, everybody wants, for many, many reasons, wants to be able to have a season that approximates something that feels normal. But what that actually will look like is something that we haven't figured out yet. And I'll be hopefully be a small part of helping to figure out what the plans are, and we'll see what makes sense there. But like with everything, it's going to be a balance, and hopefully we'll hit the balance correctly, and we'll save lives and be able to allow people the freedom that we've all expected to have. So that's, we'll know more. Stay tuned. And I wanted to say something in response to the question you asked that Reverend Kate brought up that triggered for me this thought about, we've been through this really incredible experience. We're still in it, right? It's not over, but we're going through this incredible experience, and it is a great leveler, and it can forge a set of common values and a set of common understanding, which as I think about it, is something that I feel like has been missing in our society for some time. I feel like forces and media have really tried to create different narratives and different sets of facts that people have about what and you can't really do this. You can't really do that with this experience. I mean, we're all experiencing it on our own in our own way, but we will have all gone through this experience together. And I'm hopeful that it starts to forge a little bit of a new sense of commonality that we can look for. I may have different political point of view from you, or I may have different, background, but we went through this difficult thing together, and we came out on the other side together because we looked out for each other. And now maybe we can find how we can reach some common ground on thorny issues about civil rights and human rights that maybe we weren't able to agree on in the last couple of years. So I think that could be an outcome.
Thanks, Steve. And you mentioned Robin Craver. Robin has been invited to be a panelist at our next community conversation, which is on April 28th. That will follow the streaming of You Can't Take It With You. So that conversation will be about families and friends, and obviously how we all interact with each other. So that will be a follow-up to what you just said, Steve. And I guess as we begin to think about wrapping up here, I guess one of the questions I'm just going to leave you with is, we all have had some learnings through this, and we've all figured out some things we could do differently. And I guess as we think about the end of the day here and how we get to the end of this crisis, what do you see as maybe some behaviors, habits, some things that we've been doing that we want to change going forward? And that sort of is the message I would like to leave with our audience today. And I think, Steve, you touched on sort of maybe the divisions that we've seen and the need for a more common working relationships. So, along those lines, what should we be thinking about as ways that we will change our own personal behaviors as we move forward?
Well, I would just say, I think that this whole conversation is leading to this point, which is, what did you learn? What did you learn from this? And
Right.
I hope that one of the things that we learn is that we have so much more in common, and not just people in this country, but people all over the world. And I also hope that we're able to appreciate that where people implemented science-based solutions early and were proactive and were prepared, but they had a different outcome. And I am not trying to cast political blame here at all. I'm just saying, when we step back and we look at the human experience here, it was not the same everywhere. And where it wasn't the same everywhere, we should learn from the places that had a better experience so that we can replicate that. And we shouldn't be so ego-driven that we can't recognize that our experience was certainly not the model that the rest of the world should follow, that there are other models that work, and we should take those on board.
Thank you, Steve. Julie, any changes that you see happening for yourself personally after this crisis is over?
You know what, actually, I really liked how Steve just said common value. We as humans all have the same exact value, our neighbors, members of our community. And I think for me personally, taking the time to reach out of my comfort zone is something that I want to continue doing on a very regular basis, long term for me.
Thanks, Julie. Kate, same question?
Well, for me, it's not taking for granted all of the blessings in my life. I mean, I cannot wait until I can hug my family and friends. I can't wait till we can break bread together. Just going for a walk, being able to hug someone when they're sad, all of these little things, being able to get anything you want at the store, being able to just chat at the post office. These are all things that I had really started to take for granted, and I am newly feeling blessed by all of those things in my life. And so when they return, I hope I can keep that gratitude level up.
Thanks, Kate. We started this conversation at a sort of a broad level where we began to think about Laramie and Provincetown and sort of the pandemic, and then we're ending now on each of us, and we're asking our audience to think about, what are you going to change moving forward? How will your behaviors change for the better moving forward? And we're going to continue these conversations. I direct you to provincetowntheater.org. I also encourage you to reach out to Kate, Steve, and Julie with any questions you might have as follow-up, because obviously this was a brief time for us to at least have some interaction. I want to thank Kate, Steve, Julie for participating. I want to thank the viewers for being part of this conversation. 28th, which is following You Can't Take It With You, which will be our next conversation. We're also going to be streaming some other live programming. We're looking for to keep us all connected, to leave with hope for all of us as we move forward. Thank you very much. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.